All right, come on in. So we're going to be in Ezra, Nehemiah, and I'll just kind of preface it. I'm a sucker for Tim Mackey. I didn't know there was anybody else that was also suckers for Tim Mackey till the Turners came around. And so a lot of my thinking, a lot of my even preparation is kind of based on his work, that sort of thing. He's got videos on this. It's unbelievable, all that. So I've said that. Today, my goal is to cover 5 verses. And through those 5 verses, we're going to kind of introduce this. In our Bibles, it's 2 books, Ezra and Nehemiah, and the Jewish canon. It was really one scroll, one kind of contiguous story. That being said, just let me say a few things about Ezra and Nehemiah. Am I good on audio? You can hear me? Yeah, I'm good. So in Ezra and Nehemiah, this is the culmination of the Old Testament. Like these are the last events recorded in the Old Testament. There's some genealogy after this that we get a little bit, but as far as events, there's some overlapping prophets that deal with the events of this and kind of the same time frame. But as far as like events, this is it. This is the end until, boom, the Gospels plunge on the scene roughly 400 years after the events of Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah, how can I say this? This is, it's the culmination of the Old Testament. It's a story of God's faithfulness despite man's, in this case Israel, but all of ours as well, unfaithfulness over and over and over, and how God is faithful despite our rebellion and our wickedness. And that it's kind of a story also that his purposes cannot be thwarted, and it's a story of we cannot manufacture movements of God. It is of God, and there's nothing we can do to kind of recreate that. So my aim today, I hope for three things to get through today. I want to introduce you to those 3 to 5 verses, the first 3 to 5 verses of the book. And then I want you, my hope, and this is kind of going to be the meat of today, is to kind of explain what those verses mean. Like what was when the audience, the Jewish audience heard those first things there, what it brought to their mind. And I kind of hope to impart how, like on a cliffhanger, the events of Israel, the covenants of God were as we go into this and as the book ends. I mean, when I say it is the culmination of the Old Testament, I really mean that. And it ends setting the stage for Jesus. I mean, it ends with, this is how it ends. Like, lots of things happen. Israel's rejuvenated. Everybody's rah-rah. And then it ends, I don't know if you can see that, really sad. I mean, it ends like, what the crap just happened? Like all, like we thought there was this movement of God, and we were expecting a lot of things, and none of those things came to pass. What the heck? So that's the second thing. And then the third thing, and I hope I have time, we'll see, is to just kind of leave you with the structure of the book. Maybe we'll make it there, maybe we won't. So I guarantee I'm going to go till 9:50. Somebody kind of keep me on time on that. But let's start it with these first 3, 4, 5 verses of Ezra. So we're in Ezra 1. Go ahead and open your Bibles. And really, this may be, I'll summarize the rest of it. This may be the only time we really read through some scripture. Ezra 1. In the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Everybody like underline that, highlight that. That's what today is going to be about. In order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah, The Lord moved the heart of Cyrus, king of Persia, to make a proclamation throughout his realm and to put it in writing. This is what Cyrus, king of Persia, says. The Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of the earth. He has appointed me to build a temple for him at Jerusalem in Judah. Any one of his people among you, may his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem in Judah and build the temple of the Lord, the God of Israel, the God who is in Jerusalem. And the people of any place where survivors may now be living are to provide him with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with freewill offerings for the temple of God in Jerusalem. So, let me kind of give you a little bit of detail. At this point, when this is written, Israel is in exile, still kind of in the old Babylonian Empire, which was taken over by the Persians. And basically Cyrus, this Persian king, did something that was historically unprecedented. All the previous kingdoms, they would conquer another land, and what they would do is try to wipe them out. They would take the important people, the culture makers, the culture keepers, disperse them all throughout their kingdom, move new people in, force them to adopt their ways of life, their culture, their religion, all that. And that's how they attempted to conquer them and make them part of them. They tried to incorporate them kind of into a melting pot, forcing them to adopt their culture. That's what all the kings of earth did before Cyrus. And there was some success in that, and there was a lot of failures, because if somebody's coming in trying to force their culture on you, you resist, right? Cyrus, at the urging of the Lord, I would say the hand of the Lord was on him. He did something novel. It had never been done in the history of earth, which was, all right, we conquer these people. Here's what I have a new idea. What I think I'm going to try to do is I'm going to let them retain their culture. I'm going to let them retain their religion. I want them to be strong and vibrant, and hopefully what they'll see is like there is benefit to being incorporated in a part of our kingdom, and so that will make them more happy to pay their taxes. That's essentially what Cyrus did. It was historically unprecedented, and so all these Jews who were in Babylon, that empire, y'all can go back and do that. All right, so that's a little bit of the backdrop. But what I want to get to is, what did it mean when he said, in order to fulfill the words of Jeremiah the prophet? Is that? Yeah. In order to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. Well, that begs the question. What was the word spoken to Jeremiah? And so I don't want to just jump to Jeremiah. I want to build it up so you can see the progression of how things flowed and why what Jeremiah said was so important and why they were anticipating it so much. So 9:13. All right, so here's what I'm going to do. Let's walk through the entire Old Testament. So, God creates, and it's perfect. It's Edenic. It's Eden. God and man are in relationship. Man rebels against God. God doesn't just boot man to the side, but he says, look, I'm going to set you up all this. But in that, at the very end in Genesis 3, he gives a picture that the bringer of sin will be defeated. So, man rebels against God, which separates him from God. God leaves it with this. One day, the seed of that woman is going to trample the bringer of sin. Okay. And so from that point, let's say until Noah, mankind spread out, filled the earth, and sin reigned everywhere. It got so bad that God, in order to preserve mankind, had to wipe out almost all of mankind. Okay? That gets us to Noah, right? And so in Noah, in order to preserve the human race, he kills off everybody except this one family. And God makes a promise. Look, he made a covenant. From now on, I'm not going to destroy mankind like I have before. From now on, the earth will be a safe place. I won't destroy it by water and wipe everybody out. And so that's the new state of things, right? God's not going to destroy mankind like it had been. So again, there's some hope in Eden. He's going to trample sin and death. Then with Noah, he's like, okay, I'm going to do things different. He gives this seed line. And it just kicks along for a while there. Mankind fills the earth. And then out of nowhere, we have kind of one of the principal, probably the principal character of the Old Testament just appear. And that principal character, anybody? Abraham. And so out of obscurity, out of nowhere, God said, hey, you, Abram, living in Ur, the land of the Chaldeans, here's what I want you to do. Pick up, leave, because I'm going to make you into a great nation. And then later he made a covenant with him that I'm going to bless you, I'm going to make you into a nation, and through your descendants, through your seed, all peoples on earth will be blessed. Okay? So now what I'm trying to develop here is we see this kind of redemptive arc that started with hopelessness, man rebelled against God, now what? We see little hints where God is like, I have a plan, you don't see it yet. So he plucks this one family, Abraham, and he makes a covenant with them. Look, I'm going to make you into a nation. You're going to be lots of people. I'm going to give you land. And through your seed line, all peoples on earth are going to be blessed. So, about 3 generations later, the family is still kind of small, nothing big. God has to move them down to Egypt to avoid a famine so they wouldn't die out. They go to Egypt. In Egypt, they flourish. They grow in numbers like crazy. There's so many numbers that they've already got the numbers of a nation. But they don't have the other things of a nation. They don't have land. They don't have, how about I'll call it the trappings of a nation. And so God finally says, all right, it's time, I'm going to give you the land, and there was a lot of things going into that, but it's time to bust them out. So he gives them a deliverer, Moses. Moses gets them out. They leave Egypt. Everybody knows the story, and I don't really have time, but in a lot of ways, the story of Ezra and Nehemiah is a story of a new Exodus. But I'm not going to get into that today. I really don't have time. But so God takes them out, Moses leading them out of Egypt, and he gets them to Sinai. And we have a new covenant. So this is kind of the fourth in this line of we see little glimpses of God's plan. And at Sinai, God makes a covenant, not just with like one guy like it had been before, Noah and then Abraham. This time, he makes a covenant with the whole people. And he says, look, basically like, remember the promise I told Abraham? That's for all of y'all. Y'all are going to be my people. I'm going to give you a standard by which to live, this whole big law. And if you keep it, there's going to be blessings like you can't believe. But if you violate it, if you don't keep my instructions, there's going to be consequences. Big consequences. So much so that I'm fixing to give you this land, but if you violate my instructions, my code, my law, I'm going to cause you to be booted out of the very thing I gave you. Like, I will take you off the map. So, y'all know the story, 40 years in the desert, they wander around. Finally, they get the land, and right before they're going in, Moses kind of gives them a restatement, a reminder. Y'all, here's the covenant we made with God. Here's his law that we are to obey, and he will be our people, and he will be with us. Here it is. They read it. They had this whole demonstration. They were on 2 hills reading it, the whole shebang. And one side, here's the law. One side would say, you're blessed if you keep it. And the other side, dude, there's consequences if you don't. So Moses' parting shot as they're about to go in is, God has made a deal with you, a covenant with you. Keep it. There's blessings if you do, and there's consequences if you don't. So they go in. They take the land. God's faithful in that. It kicks along a period of judges. Finally, God gives them a king. The first king isn't so good. His name's Saul. And there's some issues there. The second king, in some respects, is a really good king. And we see the next breadcrumb of God's plan in this king. This one is with King David. And so what does God tell David? Let me get sorted to where I'm at in my notes. God covenants with David. He makes a promise to him. God covenants with him or promises to him that David's family line, the line like his descendants, will be a king, will be a royalty. They will be kings, and his descendants will reign how long? Forever. Forever. So it's kind of weird, like in some respects, like most of those promises of God at that point had been fulfilled, except one. That one was the one to Abraham. Do y'all remember what Abraham, the promise God made him was? Well, the son, but through you, all peoples, all nations will be blessed. Basically, he told Abraham there, the hope of the world lies in somebody that's going to be descended from you. Through you, all nations will be blessed. Well, so then we bottleneck it, sort of. It's kind of a weird mix here when he tells David, David, your seed line, they're going to be kings, and not only just a king, but you're going to have a line of descendants that will reign as king forever. Forever. The weird thing about that is, like, David comes and he goes, and his son Solomon becomes king, right? His grandson takes the king. So this is 2 generations. God's promise, you're going to be a king, your descendants will reign forever. 2 generations down, the whole kingdom busts up. Like, it splits in 2. It divides in 2. So it's kind of like this odd thing of, man, like, God's promises, it's already looking shaky, right? He promised David's descendants that they would be kings forever and ever and ever. 2 generations later, torn apart. Yikes. Well then, so that state of affairs, the 2 kingdoms in Israel, you had one up in the north, they called it Israel. You had one in the south, they called it Judah. That existed for a couple hundred years. But then God's old promise to Moses came into effect. God promised Moses, like, if you keep my laws, I'm going to bless you like you ain't ever seen. But if you don't, there will be consequences. Northern Israel did not live up to their end of the deal, and there was consequences. So God sent, this would have been about 722 BC thereabouts, he sent this kingdom called Assyria to come in and wiped them, the northern kingdom, off the map. And so what Assyria did was they came into northern Israel, the northern kingdom. They took everybody who was, I call them, this isn't exactly right, but culture makers or culture keepers. So think your king line, the Levites who are like instituting religion, keeping it, practicing, all that kind of stuff. They took everybody that they thought that mattered to having an independent culture. They hauled them off. They spread them all over their empire, the empire of Assyria. And then they brought other people in, their people, put them all in the land to like basically see to it that Assyrian culture dominated rather than Israeli culture, right? They were trying to assimilate them into the new system being the Assyrian way of life. So boom, this is just several generations. This is a lot shorter than forever, right? And now the entire hope of the promise to Abraham, the promise to Moses and the promise to David resides in that southern kingdom. The hope for humanity resides in that southern kingdom of Judah. And that's all there is. The rest of them have been wiped out, intermingled, and there was still probably some practicing folks up there. But by and large, they're out. They're gone. They're dispersed among the nations. And so Judah kicks along a while, the kingdom of Judah, that southern kingdom. And what does Judah do? Judah does just like the northern kingdom, Israel did. And they were rebellious and wicked to God. And so eventually at some point, God tells them, like, all right, just like what I did to northern Israel, it's supposed to happen to you. And so he says a new empire is dominating the earth at this point, about 120 years after northern Israel. New empire is dominating the earth at that point, the empire of Babylon. So he sends Babylon there 2 different times, led by a king called Nebuchadnezzar. Go in there, step 1, they whip everybody and tell them, look, y'all are now under our rule. Get with the Babylonian program or we'll wipe you all the way out. Well, Judah, the southern kingdom, did not get with the Babylonian program. And so Babylon had to come back a second time. And in the second time, Babylon comes in and they essentially did what Assyria did to the northern kingdom. Babylon comes in, they take all the culture makers and keepers and haul them off. All of them. So that's all those royal line, the king line of David, they haul them off. All your priests that are involved in keeping culture, keeping their religion, they haul them off. Basically, anybody who's important in keeping the identity of Israel, they want to take them off. Okay? That's the second one. So Babylon siege 1, Babylon conquest 2. It's in between these 2 conquests, these 2 military campaigns, that this prophet called Jeremiah shows up on the scene. And so Jeremiah, after the first one, God starts revealing things to him. And even after Babylon came the first time, Judah continued to be rebellious toward God. And so God reveals to Jeremiah, I'm going to send Babylon to finish the job. So think about that at this point. How are the promises of God looking? Abraham, your descendant will be the hope of the world. It's going to bless all people. Moses, like, y'all are my people, all of y'all. Keep my commands, I'm going to bless you forever. David, you're going to be a king forever. Now, let me be clear, like, your descendants will be kings forever. You will reign forever. Let me be clear about one thing Babylon did. They dethroned the line of David. There wasn't no king in Israel after second conquest. They ain't none. It's looking hopeless. And if you're a Jew at this point, like you're thinking probably one of 2 things. You're thinking either, I guess it was all false. I guess God isn't real. Because it sure does look to me like his promises have failed. Like through our family, the family of Abraham, we're going to bless the world. David, he's going to have a kingly line that will reign forever. Man, it looks bleak. It looks like the promises of God have failed. So I guess it's not true. So you're either thinking that, or you're thinking, man, we have been so wicked that God gave up on us. It's hopeless. And that's where they sat when Jeremiah starts talking. So Jeremiah, he comes in, and particularly around chapters 30 through 33, he tells them, look, there's still hope. Babylon is coming, and they're going to take us into exile, and he says it's for 70 years. For 70 years, Babylon's going to come and take us into exile. But then Jeremiah picks up on a prophecy that Moses foresaw, and he kind of expands upon it further. God kind of reveals more information to him. Moses foresaw back in Deuteronomy 30, when he was telling them, like, keep the covenant with God. If you don't, here's the consequences. If you do, here's the blessings. He foresaw at that point, Deuteronomy 30, that they weren't going to keep the covenant and that God was going to have to take them into exile. And he hoped that God would find some way to bring them back. And so Jeremiah picks up on that kind of prophecy or foreshadowing from Moses, and he expands on it further. Moses foresaw that Israel was going to violate the covenant and that God was going to have to send conquering nations to reprimand them and send them into exile. But Moses also foresaw that God wasn't going to abandon them despite their rebellion. So Jeremiah tells them, look, yeah, you're fixing to go into exile. All the people that kind of have kept Israel as Israel. But God's going to bring you back to the land. Even though it looks bleak, God is going to see to it that y'all are going to come back. And at that same process, because here's been the cycle, man. Like, we do good for a while, and then all the people get wicked and rebel against God, and God has to come in and punish us. And like, bad things happen. Look at northern Israel. They got wiped off the map. And it just keeps happening over and over and over. We do good. We turn from God. He punishes us. So we start doing good again. We rebel against God. He comes in and he punishes us. And it's just this vicious cycle, and it never ends. And so another piece of hope that Jeremiah gives them is that one day, after they return to the land, God was going to transform the hearts of the people. That God would reinscribe the laws that he gave to Moses, the laws that he wrote on stone tablets. But this time, so think about those as like the terms of the covenant. But this time, instead of writing them on stone tablets, he was going to write them where? On their hearts. It's one of the most quoted, that Jeremiah 30 through 33 is one of the most quoted sections of the Old Testament in the New Testament. He was going to put the terms of the covenants inside the people so that it would enable them to get out of this vicious cycle of sin and rebellion and punishment and sin and rebellion and punishment. He was going to write the laws on their hearts and in their minds. Ezekiel, who came a little bit after, he kind of expanded on this. He termed it a little different. Instead of writing the laws on their heart, what Ezekiel said was, I'm going to take your heart of stone and I'm going to give you a heart of flesh. I'm going to take your hard hearts. I'm going to put a new heart in you, new spirit. So Jeremiah tells them, like, not just is God going to bring you back to the land. After you get there, he's going to give you a way that you can keep the covenant so that you can escape this vicious cycle of sin and rebellion and punishment and death. And not only that, but once that happens too, you got taken from the land. Who got dethroned? Your king. When God brings you back and gives you a way to keep his covenant, he's going to give you a new king, the king you've been waiting for, a promised king. We call that today, does anybody know what they call that? Messiah. Christ. I'm going to give you a promise. When you go back to the land and God gives you a new heart so that you can keep the covenant, I'm going to give you a new king. And he's going to be like superhero king. Because when I give you this new king, guess what's fixing to happen? The promise that I made all the way back to Abraham, what was that promise? The hope of the world, through your progeny, all peoples will be blessed. When this new king comes on the site, all the nations are going to recognize that the God of Israel is the true God, the only God, and they're going to come and they're going to worship him. That was the word of the Lord spoken by Jeremiah. That was the expectation of the people. When they hear, okay, Cyrus is letting us go back to our land. Cyrus is giving us back our nation. Their expectations, I probably should have made this shorter. Return, rebuild, their expectations are not just, yay, we get our land back. Their expectations are, we get to go back, we're going to rebuild the city, we're going to rebuild the temple, we're going to rebuild our culture. God's going to give us a new king, the king that he promised. And boom, the promises that he made all the way back to Abraham are fixing to be fulfilled. And all the nations will recognize the God of Israel as the one and only true God. That is how this book, what we're fixing to deal with, is the culmination of the entire Old Testament and sets the stage for Jesus. How are we looking on time here? 9:30. I've done pretty good. I'm happy because I didn't think I would get through that. Huh?
Making ground.
Yeah. So that's how we get into Ezra. Now then, I actually have time. I'm going to get to set up the book. So what's going to happen in Ezra? When I say Ezra and Nehemiah, what's going to happen in this book? So Cyrus, Mackey calls this the Jeremiah hyperlink that we just talked about here. What's going to happen is the story is set up in 3 narratives, okay? And these narratives, the book isn't like it starts in chronologically in chapter 1 and goes all the way through on a straight timeline to the end of Nehemiah. It's not how it's set up. The way it's set up, he kind of gives 3 narrative stories of 3, like, first they rebuilt the temple, and he kind of gives the whole story of that process of rebuilding the temple. And this story overlaps with the second story, which is Ezra reinstitutes religion, or the Torah, the respect for God. And it overlaps with Nehemiah coming in and restoring the city, rebuilding the walls, rebuilding that. So you have some main characters in each. We know 2 of them. They're very familiar to us. But the first one, not so much. So the first wave of people, the primary characters in this narrative are Sheshbazzar, try saying that 3 times fast, Zerubbabel, and Jeshua. They come in and kind of the first thing they do is they restore the temple. So they rebuild the altar. They kind of get the people back on the Jewish calendar so that their lives start revolving around the covenant of God again. So that's the first thing. Second story is Ezra, and he comes and kind of reinstitutes the law, how they honor God through the Torah. But man, you're going to be blown by this one because it's a screwed up story, man. What happens with Ezra. Like honestly, as Christians sitting here in the 21st century now, you're not going to believe. Like, dude was trying to do right. He was trying to honor God, and you will not imagine how weirdly they screwed it up. And so little plug for 2 weeks when I teach that again. And then Nehemiah comes in and rebuilds the walls. And in each of these narrative stories, you got your main actors. They face external opposition in each, and then they overcome it, and they accomplish those things. A question in each of these is going to be the opponents that they faced. Did they have to? Did these people have to be opponents? That's going to be a theme throughout all three of those narrative stories. But at the end, the temple is rebuilt. The Torah is restored. The city, the walls, the infrastructure is built, kind of giving them a fortress to reinstitute their identity as God's people. All three of those things were accomplished. And those are the three narratives. At the end of Nehemiah, we kind of have this epilogue. And just so you know, like we can tell these are intended to be three independent stories, kind of separate from this. He starts it off here with a census of the people that came over from Babylon, and he ends it here with the same census. So it's like, hey y'all, I'm starting the story. Hey y'all, I'm ending the stories. Okay? So he bookends it. He bookends it on each side. Then they finish off with this epilogue. And the first half is awesome. It's like, dude, we rebuilt the temple. We've reinstituted our fidelity to the Torah. We've rebuilt our infrastructure, our protection as a city, as a culture, as an identity. And man, they have a party, and it's awesome. And they get like a band, and they Nehemiah rebuilt these walls. They get up on the walls, and they march. The band gets up on the walls, and the people follow them as they go down the wall. They got two bands, so they go in opposite directions. And they go all the way around the city. I mean, it's a huge party. Like people from far away, they said it was such noise that people from way out heard them. It was a happening. Dude, it is so awesome. I can't believe this. I mean, it's like, yes, God is keeping his promises. And so you know what they're thinking, right? We know what they're thinking. We've returned. We've rebuilt. What's coming next? And when the king comes, what happens then? Everybody's going to come say, dude, y'all were right. That's what they're thinking. And so it's a party. And everybody, that is the expectation. Boom, we did it. Then we finish off in the epilogue. That was the happy. Awesome. And I don't know how to term this except, what the crap? Is
that Hebrew?
Yeah, I think so. Because in between, Nehemiah goes back. Kind of it's a jump in the timeline. Nehemiah goes back. I didn't tell you, he was a cupbearer to the king, the Persian king that he was serving under, and the Persian king let him go to Jerusalem and rebuild the walls. There's a jump in the timeline. Nehemiah goes back to the kingdom, Persia, I guess Babylon. I don't remember where the capital was at that point. But he goes back to serve the king. And then he gets to come back, after a period of time, he comes back to Jerusalem. And what does Nehemiah find? So remember, these are the three things they accomplished. This is what he finds. The temple is in disrepair. They're dishonoring it. The Torah is being ignored. Nobody's living up to it. And the walls are being violated in their sanctity. Like people are on Sabbath out there selling crud out by the walls. And so each of the accomplishments is undone right at the end. And Nehemiah's like, God, I guess, remember what we tried? Because Nehemiah's left thinking, dude, I thought it was happening. and seen. That's the book. That's where it ends. It's the most anticlimactic, like, what just happened, end of book, end of play. I mean, everything we've been building up to, all those promises of God, we thought it was here. We thought it was here. God's left us the breadcrumbs, and, that's it. And that is Ezra, Nehemiah. So I guess I'll say a little bit about our structure. What we're planning on doing, we're going to teach, and then we're going to preach. So today, I kind of handled this in the setup. We're going to teach each of these sections. We hadn't decided if we're going to teach the epilogue separately or whether we're going to kind of work the epilogue into each section. That gives us 3 or 4 more weeks, whatever. Then we're going to get a little preachy at the end. That's kind of our plan. Got anything else to say? You want to say?
No, excited to have this crowd. Last time you were in that top, we had 3 people.
I like it. I like it. So that's why we say keep coming back. Yeah. So that's what I got. This may be the first time in my life that I finished on time. So that's pretty awesome. So we'll do what?
That first half was strong. Like, Mackie would be really impressed.
All right, so let's close this out in prayer. Blake, you want to close this out in prayer?